it out, don't look at the way, no, not what you're thinking. We're pulling the soul, stuck in our thumbs, it's an easy time. Got me a friend, take a friend. That's all we got is fire and friends. There's nothing, I just don't get it.
Mascot horror. My favorite thing. Being a fan of horror, and especially horror video games, it's been interesting to watch as the market shifts. I remember when Dead Space 3 came out, and there were these discussions floating around amongst AAA publishers about how horror as a genre is dead, because self-contained story-driven single-player games are no longer viable since players were no longer interested in those types of games. The entirety of their evidence for this claim came pretty much solely from the fact that Call of Duty was the #1 game franchise in the world during the 7th generation of consoles. And every publisher wanted their games to be Call of Duty, and they never were. And so Tomb Raider would come out and receive massive critical praise, but Square Enix would call the franchise a disappointment because its sales figures didn't match that of the biggest game franchise in the world, which was in a completely different genre. And then Dead Space 3 would come out and everyone hated it because it tried to focus on a multiplayer experience that they could then sell DLC for, rather than being an isolating horror experience. And EA decided that everyone just hated it because it was a narrative-focused game, and that's why it didn't sell as much as Call of Duty. And while all of this was going on, Amnesia: The Dark Descent had made waves a few years prior, and literally that same year, in 2013, Outlast came out and was a huge hit. And then the next year, something happened that was kind of by accident, because in 2014, Scott Cawthon released Five Nights at Freddy's. And looking back, FNAF didn't exactly revive the genre, because it technically never left. AAA publishers just decided that they were not bothering with them anymore, so we were getting more popular indie stuff, but what FNAF did was that it completely changed what the horror landscape looked like. There are sort of two timelines here that run parallel to each other, but are also a bit staggered given that one timeline started later than the other. That being that Scott Cawthon released Five Nights at Freddy's in 2014, and Capcom released Resident Evil 7 in 2017. As we move further down the timeline, we get Bendy and the Ink Machine in 2018, and Resident Evil 2 Remake in 2019. And these two timelines have continued to where now the horror genre in the video games industry is bigger and more popular than it's probably ever been, but we're now also getting just the absolute weirdest shit I've ever seen as companies try to capture what both of these two timelines have created. Because Five Nights at Freddy's released at the same time that the PewDiePie and Markiplier style of facecam Let's Plays began to really hit their peak, there suddenly became this new market, where children could interact and even become fans of horror video games without ever owning or playing it. And when you create a large fan base of children, that means more money, because now instead of just video games, you have this whole world of toys and t-shirts and other random stupid bullshit that you can put out there, and your audience will eat all that merchandise up without so much of a critical eye as merchandise meant for adults. And thus, now we have mascot horror, a genre that now, rather than making a compelling game and seeing what audiences respond to in order to capitalize on it, games are being made with marketability built in. Publishers and developers aren't just waiting to see if a character gets popular, they are telling you, you like this character. This is your favorite part of the game. Lucky for you, we already printed the t-shirts of them before the game released, since we already decided that this is the part that you're gonna like the most. And all of this has led us to Poppy Playtime. Poppy Playtime is a game that I am a little conflicted on because on one hand, I like what I've played of it. Now for clarity, I've only played chapters 1 and 2 at this point. But so far, I like what of the game I've played. I think the gimmick of the grab pack is fun, I like the characters in Chapter 2, and the mystery that the plot revolves around is genuinely interesting. Also, this game introduced us to one of my two sons that I currently have with my husband, Bone Crusher. But at the same time, Poppy Playtime kind of represents everything that I hate about the current state of the horror game landscape. A product that seems to be designed more so for the marketability of toys with links to their merch website right on the main menu. A website that is very conspicuously optimized for tablets and I need to get on with it. The manga. There's a Poppy Playtime manga. I'm skipping over everything now that I was going to write because this isn't a video essay about the absolute state of the horror gaming industry and how it's all kind of Poppy Playtime's fault. I have a million thoughts about this, but this is a manga channel. I'm nearly 1,000 words in on this script, and I just mentioned the manga, so let's keep moving. But the thing is, this manga, which is titled Poppy Playtime Forever, Shinobi Yoru Ashioto, is not actually the manga that I want to talk about. I actually want to talk about this one. This manga is titled, well, Poppy Playtime, and is a 15-page horror one-shot by Kazuki Oda. So what's the deal with this? Good question. So finding information about either of these have been a massive pain in the ass. Pretty much all of the information I have comes from Anime News Network. So Poppy Playtime Forever, which is also the name of an official Poppy Playtime Roblox game, was launched in Ribbon magazine in July of 2024. Ribbon being a shoujo magazine that is under the same parent company as Jump. For those who don't know, a shoujo magazine is a magazine that is specifically targeting young and teenage girls. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, Lily, why did they put the Poppy Playtime manga into the little girls magazine? Hey, have you noticed how many horror manga have female protagonists? Or at least a prominent female character that is driving the story? Especially how many Junji Ito manga have female leads, and how Tomie, one of his most well-known works, is essentially about a teenage girl's romantic life. This isn't really by accident. For a while in Japan, it was common for boys to think that horror and supernatural stories were childish, and thus not manly. They would rather read an action shonen manga. So horror suddenly became a genre for girls. So for a long time, horror manga was most prominent in shoujo magazines and was targeted towards teen girls. I don't know if this is still the case, but this explains why a licensed horror one-shot would end up in a shoujo magazine. This manga was written by Emi Ishikawa. Ishikawa is a horror mangaka, her most popular work being Sekyo Gakyu, a horror manga one-shot anthology series framed around a ghost girl telling you scary stories to teach you quote-unquote scary lessons. So this came out in July 2024 as an 8-page one-shot, but I can find literally nothing on it, no scans, no reviews, nothing. Yeah, okay, Lily, that's cool and all, but what about the manga that you're actually going to be talking about? So, this is Poppy Playtime. This manga was released in February of 2024. The Anime News Network article that I read states that it was published in December of 2023, but the author's Instagram says February 2024, so that's the one I'm trusting. And this sort of has the opposite problem of Poppy Playtime Forever. There is a full scanlation of it, but background information on this is even more sparse, to the point where I was actually struggling to find out if this manga was even official or if it was doujinshi, aka a fully self-published fan work. I actually reached out to the author on Instagram, but I haven't heard back, though to be fair, the author does only post like once every 20 weeks or something, so it will probably be a while before he even sees it. So Poppy Playtime was written by Kazuki Oda, who actually has some extra art of the characters from the manga on his Instagram, and it was published under Koro Koro magazine. Koro Koro is a children's magazine whose most famous publication is probably Doraemon, though notably they publish quite a few video game tie-in mangas, like for Sonic the Hedgehog, and for Bomberman nerds like me, this is the magazine that Bomberman Jetters was published through. They also publish a ton of Nintendo manga, for series like Mario, Pokemon, and Splatoon. Something also to keep in mind is that one of Koro Koro's biggest competition is Jump magazine. And like Jump, Koro Koro has multiple magazines in publication, with Poppy Playtime specifically being published in Besatsu Koro Koro comic. And the end of this manga specifically states that it will get full serialization if enough fans vote for it. Oda's Instagram page also mentions that this can be turned into a series depending on the poll. So, with all of this jumbled information, this is the story that I could gather about the Poppy Playtime manga. And side note, I could find literally no information from Mob. There are no announcements or publicity or anything else of that nature. The only thing that I can find from them is that in the magazine License Global, which from what I could gather is a magazine that is literally just about licensing things, they held an interview with Shelly Gaynor, who is Mob's head of global licensing. The interview was about how they successfully have been turning Poppy Playtime into a massive licensed IP. And when asked about upcoming Poppy Playtime books that are being published through Scholastic, Gaynor mentioned in one single sentence, literally just as like a random throwaway comment, that they've also enjoyed collaborating with publishers in Japan to create Poppy Playtime manga. And that's it. That's all I can find from Mob. So at least on the English-speaking North American side of the internet, this is what I could put together with the information that I have. So Mob decides that they want a Poppy Playtime manga to be produced as part of their relentless pursuit to have Huggy Wuggy's face on literally every single type of product in existence. So they decide to have it published in a children's magazine, being that this is a franchise that, despite its content, does target primarily kids. They partner with Koro Koro and ask them to make it happen. Koro Koro hands the project over to Kazuki Oda to actually write and draw the manga, and they run the first chapter to test reception. Then, one of two things likely happens. Either the Koro Koro readers weren't receptive at all to it, or they weren't receptive enough to serialize it, but there was enough to show Mob that there was still some level of interest in it. Either way, Koro Koro doesn't get the magazine serialized and Mob jumps ship, deciding instead to put it into a shoujo magazine and hands the license off to Ribbon, where we got Poppy Playtime Forever. And with all of that, I can finally do what I wanted to do, which is talk about the damn manga itself. On this channel, I try not to get too deep into things like the history of certain manga, as I want my channel to be mostly about the content of the works itself, mostly about narrative. But I keep picking things that are just... fucking damn it. I didn't want to just say, I don't know anything, let's get into it, especially because this manga being official makes it significantly more interesting to talk about. But I wasn't expecting a recent promotion for Poppy Playtime of all things to be impossible to find even just surface level information about the manga's existence. Anyway, let's get on with it. And real quick, if you like listening to me yap, then a like on the video would be much appreciated. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more of me talking about what horror manga has managed to catch my interest that week. Alright, on to the plot. Okay, so I'm going to run through the plot in its entirety without stopping, and then we'll circle back to discuss it at the end. Okay, so what happens in this? So we open to see Huggy Wuggy looking a little spaced out, and the first panel shows us that he is slowly approaching two kids. The little girl screams as she sees this horrific monster approaching. We then get the title page. New story, not seen in game. The massively popular game is finally a manga here in Koro Koro. I have a mystery to solve, even if investigating it costs me my life. The next page seems to jump back in time from a short while ago, with the two kids standing before the front gate of the Playtime Co. factory. The boy remarks that they finally made it. And yes, he is already wearing the grab pack before they've even entered the factory, you'll see why in a bit. We are then introduced to our two main characters, Momoko, the 11-year-old older sister, and Momomaru, the 10-year-old younger brother. Only a year apart, dude. Mom really didn't get a break, did she? In the next panel, Momomaru explains that this building was once a toy factory, but 5 years ago, all of the employees mysteriously went missing. One of those employees being Momomaru and Momoko's father. Momomaru explains that Dad loved, specifically him, more than anything else. Yeah, get fucked, Momoko, your ass ain't inheriting nothing. And Momomaru says that this is why he's so determined to find out what happened, while Momoko comments about how creepy the place is. They open the factory doors and step inside as Momoko asks if they can please just go home, and she comments that it feels like something is going to jump out at them. Momomaru tells Momoko that if she's scared, then she can just go ahead and go home. But Momoko declines, stating that as the older sister, she can't just leave her brother alone as he wanders into such a dangerous place. She tells Momomaru that just because he scored number 1 in the national exams doesn't mean he can just wander in here and just solve the mystery. Momomaru basically dismisses Momoko as being a fucking idiot, saying, "Get back to me when your grades are higher than mine." Momoko then, understandably and within perfect reason, punches Momomaru in the back of the fucking head. Momomaru, however, says that he'll be just fine because he built a weapon at home to bring along. Yes, this is the grab pack, and he says that anything that jumps out, he'll just take care of with this. Momoko asks how he made it, a question that you'd think would be more for the journey over there, and Momomaru just simply says he built it due to vast scientific knowledge. He then gives Momoko a demonstration, shouting the name of his attack, Terra Impact. Momoko then comments that her brother, who is a whole entire year younger than her, is still pretty childish since he named his grab pack attack like it's a fucking JoJo stand. Momomaru then asks that if he's childish, then what does that make her, since she's a big stupid idiot who can't academically match him, and Momoko Terra impacts him right in his smug ass face. As they proceed forward, they are faced with a large statue. Looking at it, Momomaru realizes that this is actually a giant doll. Noticing the plaque right in front of it, they learn that this doll is called Huggy Wuggy, and is the most popular toy that Playtime ever made. Momomaru, aka the Turbo Genius, informs us that the fact that the doll sold well and that there is a giant version stood before them, that must mean that the doll sold well and so a giant version was made. While he's distracted, Momoko seems to notice something, that being that the giant Huggy Wuggy has disappeared, commenting that it must have wandered off somewhere right before hitting the "it's right behind me, isn't it?" The next panel, we see the cute face of Huggy Wuggy before he opens his mouth, revealing the rows of sharp teeth in a full-page piece of art. The two kids try to run away, Momoko screaming as they flee. Momoko, freaking out, starts shouting questions about why is it moving and why is it trying to eat them. Momomaru hits an honestly sick 180 turn, launching his grab pack attack and misses. Momoko, obviously frustrated, asks what the hell he's doing, Momomaru coming up with the reasoning that Huggy Wuggy is too fast. Huggy Wuggy then hits a T-pose, asserting his dominance over the children as Momomaru tries to come up with a way to restrict the doll's movement. Momoko screams at him that there's no time to stand around and scheme and that they just need to fucking run. Momomaru starts to look around, looking for any way he can slow Huggy Wuggy down before he suddenly has a brain blast. He yells for Momoko to run across a nearby catwalk, using his grab pack to point at it like a jackass. The two kids run down the catwalk before Momoko realizes something. The catwalk is a dead end, and Huggy Wuggy has now began Naruto running, making his approach even faster. However, Momomaru points out that while they have nowhere to go, neither does the monster, and the catwalk is narrow enough that Huggy Wuggy no longer has any room to dodge. Momomaru takes stance, and then he just absolutely fucking thundercunts Huggy Wuggy right in its torso. Smoke rises out of its mouth, making me think that Momomaru just killed it on impact, and the monster falls over the railing. The siblings watch as the doll plummets into the abyss. The danger seems to be gone, at least for now. Momoko takes a moment to collect herself, remarking that she really thought she was going to die had it not been for Momomaru. Momomaru remarks how strange this all is, and begins to wonder if any of this is related to the disappearances. Despite everything that just happened, Momomaru is in a surprisingly good mood, saying that he's happy that he came here and has a newfound confidence that he's going to solve this mystery. Momoko, on the other hand, is quite upset that he's going to keep on with this whole thing, being that it nearly just got them both killed. Momomaru reiterates that if she's scared, then she can just go home, and Momoko, once again, refuses to leave him there alone. The two children are so distracted in their argument that they don't notice that they're being watched by Poppy. Poppy is surprised that a pair of humans could defeat Huggy Wuggy and states that the toys in the factory are alive. The final panel gives us a close-up look at Poppy's face as she mutters, "Let the games begin." And then they never did, because the manga ends with a note saying that with good enough reader feedback, the one-shot could get fully serialized, and I guess none of the kids reading Koro Koro that month gave enough of a shit about it. The end. Okay, I have some thoughts. What makes talking about something like this difficult is that unlike other one-shots that we've discussed here so far, this isn't meant to be a self-contained story. This wasn't really written as a story that was meant to be taken wholly on its own. That being said, this does present itself as a one-shot, with the opportunity for this one-shot to then become a series. And it's still trying to present itself as compelling enough that you would want to see more. So does it do that successfully? Okay. Let me first start out with the stuff I do like. So first things first, I think Kazuki Oda did a really great job in translating the first few rooms of the factory from Poppy Playtime Chapter 1 into this manga, to a point where if you played the game, you just immediately recognize exactly where they are. One of the other things that I actually really do like is something that may have pissed a few of you off, that being the changes to the world. Things like the grab pack not being a tool used by factory workers, but rather a weird contraption that this kid came up with, as well as the plot revolving around these two kids solving the disappearances rather than an ex-employee. The reason I like these things is that changes like this allows the story to sort of exist on its own, as well as sort of justifying its existence. If this was a one-to-one retelling of the plot of the game, then what would we need this manga for? We already have that story in the form of the game. And while yes, you are putting that story into a different medium, meaning that it may be more accessible to a different audience, I don't feel like something like this would really catch the interest of someone who isn't at least familiar with the game. Let's talk about the characters, more so why I think they could work. So I do like Momomaru and Momoko as characters, but one caveat to that is that there seems to be some seeds being sown for their growth throughout the story in this first chapter. This whole thing is very obviously set up as being entirely Momomaru's idea, and he keeps saying things like how Dad loved me more than anything. He didn't say that Dad loved them both, just himself. And his whole motivation is that he's here to find their father, and after defeating Huggy Wuggy, he's far more gung-ho about actually doing this as he feels one step closer to saving his dad. At the same time, Momoko doesn't seem to actually care. From the very beginning, Momoko doesn't show any level of desire to actually find their dad. She is there entirely because of Momomaru. She keeps trying to get him to go home. She thinks it's insane to keep going after they were both almost killed. She doesn't want to find her dad, she just wants Momomaru to be safe. And so from this, I think I could put together what direction the story was probably going to go in. Or at the very least, this is what I can infer from just the story. Momomaru is annoying in a way that feels intentional. He keeps boasting about his academic intelligence and essentially calls Momoko stupid at various points in the story. What seems to be going on is that Momomaru is essentially the golden child of his family. He's number one in the nation in academics at 10 years old. He's an inventor, creating something as complex as the grab pack. He's calm and collected. He's very refined in his dumb little bow tie and vest. And Momoko is the girl, with comments about how father loved him, with Momoko's indifference about the whereabouts of their dad. It seems that Momomaru got all of the attention from their father. Momomaru was the prodigy who was probably always propped up by their parents as the one who was destined for greatness, while Momoko was ignored for being average. Her life has probably always revolved entirely around her younger brother, with her parents demanding she adjust her life around him. When she denies going home, she doesn't mention that it's because she cares about her brother or that she wants to keep him safe. She mentions that she's the older sister, so she has to stay, as if this is an obligation rather than something that she is doing out of love for her brother. The direction that I feel this was going to go in is probably that they continue throughout their adventure in the factory. They would have more and more scrapes with death, and this tension between them would keep growing and growing until it finally came forward that Momoko hates her brother because her brother doesn't see her as an equal, he sees her as something that's there to serve his current needs. And her brother's academic success is the reason why she has been ignored by her parents her entire life. From that point, as they solve the mystery, they would probably learn to appreciate each other and see each other more as actual siblings rather than as rivals. So the art. Again, it looks good. I have one very specific complaint that I'll get to, but I think the art does look good. As far as specific panels, I like this one of the kid standing in front of Huggy Wuggy. I really like this full page art too. I like this panel of Huggy getting just absolutely fucking gut punched, and this one of the kids watching Huggy fall into the abyss, but that's mostly because of this. I love all of Huggy Wuggy's cunty ass poses that he keeps hitting throughout this story. Okay, enough with the sunshine and rainbows and unicorn farts, let's move over to the bitching zone. The thing that you probably noticed immediately was the character designs. I actually do like the character designs for the siblings. Now, I do like the original design for Momomaru more, but I think what we do have works. With Momomaru being the posh shithead, he has his little vest and bow tie, while Momoko, being a more loud and vulgar person, is dressed in more casual street clothes. And I sort of had to get myself in the right headspace when looking at these character designs in order to properly gather my thoughts on them. And that is mostly because Momoko looks almost identical to Atari from Transformers the Kiss players, which gave me a sort of regurgitative reaction upon seeing her. But I think the fact that this design works for Momoko shows how a character design like this is far better suited for a frightened child who is looking for their dad, rather than a supposedly adult woman whose comic's entire plot revolves around her willingness to have sex with a Mazda RX-8. So the designs work for the characters. What's the problem? Well, the designs work when you stand them next to each other on a plain white background and then do nothing else with them. The problem arises, however, when you actually insert them into this story. See, this is where Oda's ability to translate the look of the factory and the characters of the game so well comes back to bite them in the ass. Because Momomaru and Momoko don't really look like they belong in this world. It's kind of jarring at times to the point where they almost look like they aren't really there, but rather have been superimposed into the world of Poppy Playtime. And it doesn't help that in some panels the characters have an extremely thick white outline around them, which really makes it look like they're edited on top of the backgrounds. It's giving a I've inserted my OC into my favorite piece of media, let me know if you can actually tell type of vibe. Okay, so the plot? So the problem with this, again, is it's essentially designed to be a pitch of things to come. Because of that, there's not too much of a plot. There are lots of promises of a plot happening at some point. However, the story is supposed to be a one-shot with the possibility of serialization, meaning that this very well could have been a short, self-contained, yet open-ended story. And while it kind of is that, when reading it, it really just feels like 15 pages of sequel bait. And the thing is, I do wish this manga kept going, but probably not exactly for the reason that Korokoro and Kazuki Oda would have hoped for. I mostly just have an interest for what exactly Oda was planning to do with this, not because the chapter or characters have me so hooked that I have to know what happens next, but just that this whole thing is kind of weird, and I just sort of wonder exactly what direction Oda was trying to go with this. Especially because this makes it feel like more of an action manga than a horror manga, which might have something to do with it being in Korokoro, which makes you think that when it got moved into a shoujo magazine, it's probably more of a horror manga there. It feels like they were going for what the game did, where chapter 1 was a short preview to gauge interest with almost nearly the exact same events happening. Show up at the factory, have a bit of a squabble with Huggy Wuggy, then end it with Poppy saying something slightly ominous and tell everyone, oh hey, let us know if you want chapter 2 so you can see what happens. But the difference is that Poppy Playtime is a video game. So exploring the abandoned factory was a bit more ominous, and the encounter with Huggy Wuggy was a bit more intense because the players were actually interacting with it. Poppy Playtime Chapter 1 had, frankly, very little substance, but there was reasons to go back to it. Things like the videotapes, and of course the speedruns became popular. As a video game, you have to have a very different approach when trying to capture the audience's attention and get them to care about it, versus when you're trying to do that while your audience is sitting and reading a magazine. I don't imagine this was ever going to have an extremely compelling or profound, overarching plot or mystery. This chapter suggests to me that this manga would be very character-driven, which is fine, it's just difficult to try to pitch something like that in such a short amount of time. Many horror manga one-shots tend to tell us very little about the characters, and instead focus more on having an interesting plot, or really cool art, or just something else, because quite often, if you want a more character-focused story, it requires a bit slower of a burn to get your readers attached to them. So that was Poppy Playtime, a manga one-shot that fell somewhat short, but let me know what you guys think of this story. Do you like the Poppy Playtime manga? Did you find the characters interesting, or did you actually get excited by any of the action? And if you liked any part I disliked, or disliked any part I liked, let me know in the comments. I would love to have a discussion about this story. I'm hoping to find scans of Poppy Playtime Forever at some point, just to see whatever the hell they tried to do with that. But this was interesting in its own special way, I guess. And if you've learned anything from this manga, it should at least be this. Next time you're in a street fight, make sure to yell Terra Impact to make your punches land harder.